Wherever it's happening, we'll be there from 12 noon on TV, radio and online. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michael Portillo. Join me on GB News on a Sunday morning for topical discussion, debate, arts and culture, and sometimes even some ethical dilemmas.
I don't always agree with you, Michael.
Michael Portillo, Sundays on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Camilla Tominey. Join me on GB News on Sunday mornings for a politics show with personality.
On TV, radio and online.
GB News, the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Deebs & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Mark Stein. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
Why not take us home with you by visiting the GB News shop at gbnews.store. You'll find all the official merchandise, a really good present actually for yourself, your friends or your family.
We ship across the UK mainland at no extra cost. GB News, the People's Channel.
Here on GB News Live, we'll be keeping you in the picture, finding out what's happening across the country and finding out why it matters to you. We'll have the facts fast with our team of reporters and specialist correspondents. Wherever it's happening, we'll be there from 12 noon on TV, radio and online. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday on GB News, it's Bev Turner Today from 10 a.m. We're going to be here for you, our GB News family, to keep you up to date, but also make you smile.
The guy went from puberty to adultery.
And I can't wait to bring a few of my own opinions.
I have no time for cultural totalitarianism.
We'll engage in passionate, but always polite debate, with your thoughts and opinions at the centre of it all. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know. The latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
Hello and welcome back to the briefing in 2023, your afternoon fix of all the latest political news, debate and analysis. I'm Arlene Foster and here's what's coming up over the next hour. Prince Harry is back with even more claims in his leaked extracts from his autobiography, Spare. From cocaine to fights with William. Much against my better judgment, we will be analysing all of the juicy details throughout the programme. It's another day of strike action. We will be getting the latest from the picket lines today as Mick Lynch has issued the government with an ultimatum to get the negotiations up and running or face more strike action in the coming months. It's been a big week for the Prime Minister and Sir Keir Starmer, both outlining their visions for the country. We will be analysing their speeches in what promises to be a busy year in Westminster politics. I'll be talking to Number 10's former business director about his views on what the year will bring for the jobs market and businesses. And finally, I'll be interviewing former US National Security Advisor John Bolton about the state of affairs in Iran 3 years since Qasem Soleimani was assassinated. Also, I want to hear from you. Give me your political briefing. Send in your views and opinions by emailing gbviews@gbnews.uk or tweet me at gbnews.
Good afternoon, it's 1 minute past 2. Your top stories from the GB newsroom. Prince Harry has revealed he found out his grandmother, Queen Elizabeth, had died via a news website and not from his family. It's among a number of revelations from his memoir, Spare, including allegations his brother, Prince William, allegedly attacked him. The Duke of Sussex also claims he killed 25 Taliban fighters in Afghanistan. The admission's been condemned by a senior Taliban leader who's taken to Twitter saying they weren't chess pieces, they were humans. Former royal correspondent Charles Ray told us the book could be the end of Harry's relationship with the royal family.
These are machine gun revelations and accusations, and it is staggering that he's come out with all this stuff. I mean, to a point of being disgusting with some of the revelations. I don't believe that Harry's ever going to be forgiven for doing what he's done with this book. I mean, the documentaries and the Oprah Winfrey were bad enough, but this book is way out there, really is.
The Prime Minister's invited union leaders representing striking workers to meet with him on Monday. Rishi Sunak says he hopes for a grown-up conversation about what's affordable. It comes as passengers experience the fourth consecutive day of train strikes over jobs, pay and conditions. Only 20% of services are operating as normal. Mr Sunak says the government will try and ensure some services continue during strike action.
We're going to bring forward new laws in common with countries like France, Italy, Spain and others that ensure that we have minimum levels of safety in critical areas like fire, like ambulance, so that even when strikes are going on, you know that your health will be protected. I think that's entirely reasonable, and that's what our new laws will do.
Meanwhile, RMT's General Secretary Mick Lynch says he doesn't think potential new laws will work.
They've also lost the argument on the existing anti-trade union laws because every union is defeating them by having mass ballots. They want to make the action that comes out of those ballots virtually illegal. I don't think it's going to work. I don't think they understand what they're doing. They keep quoting what goes on in France and Spain and all the rest of the world. These laws have never been enforced in those countries, and they're not enacted in the same way that Grant Shapps is trying to bring in.
Flu cases in England's hospitals are continuing to rise as ambulance handover delays hit a record high. Just over 40% of patients waited more than half an hour to be transferred to A&E. An average of just over 5,000 flu patients were in hospital last week. That's up 47% on the previous week. It comes amid a wave of strikes across the health sector. The Royal College of Nursing, though, says their members will now consider a 10% pay rise instead of the 19% originally demanded. Health Secretary Steve Barclay says he's keen for an agreement to be reached.
Well, I'm keen to have dialogue with Pat Cullen and the RCN. I wrote to them last week looking at the coming year, at the pressures from inflation and cost of living, how we could work together to make any settlement more affordable in terms of looking at what productivity opportunities there are, what efficiency opportunities there are, because there's common ground in recognising that the NHS is under pressure and we need to respond to that.
The average house price in the UK fell for a fourth consecutive month in December. Last month's prices dropped by 1.5% compared to November, which means the average house price is now at just over £281,000. Halifax also says uncertainty over the cost of living crisis and rising interest rates are slowing the housing market. Shell will pay around £1.7 billion in UK and EU windfall taxes for the final quarter of last year. The oil giant says it'll face a hit to earnings because of the increased UK energy profits levy and additional EU taxes. In October, bosses at the firm said they hadn't paid any UK windfall taxes because of heavy investment in the North Sea. Former Chelsea striker and manager Gianluca Vialli has died from pancreatic cancer at the age of 58. Vialli earned 59 caps for Italy and won the Champions League with Juventus before joining Chelsea in 1996. He was the first Italian to take charge of a Premier League side, becoming Blues manager in 1998. And some welcome good news to the high streets. The number of independent bookshops in the UK and Ireland has reached a 10-year high. The Booksellers Association says the increase is down to an astonishing number of new books coming out during the pandemic. It's the 6th consecutive year the number of bookshops has increased. This is GB News. We're bringing more as it happens now, though. It's back to the briefing with Arlene.
Welcome back to The Briefing, and thanks to Rhiannon for those news headlines. Well, Prince Harry's new book is due to be released next week, and revelations are coming out thick and fast. So far, it's been revealed that Prince Harry considered his brother as his arch nemesis. And Prince Harry also recounts his time serving in Afghanistan, where he says he killed 25 Taliban soldiers. The book says he did not consider them as people, but instead as chess pieces, which he had to take off the board. Well, I'm joined now by GB News royal reporter Cameron Walker, who's had a very, very busy, not day, but weeks looking at all of this, Cameron. Personally, to misquote Clement Attlee, I'd quite like a period of silence from Prince Harry, but I don't think that's going to happen. Tell us about all of these new revelations.
Not anytime soon.
I know.
Exactly, Arlene. Yes, I mean, all these details which has come out via the accidental sale in Spain of the Spanish language version of Prince Harry's memoir, Spare, they're very intimate. It shows Prince Harry, in my view, has a lot of anger and feels like he was constantly in the shadow of his brother, the heir, Prince William. Obviously, we got that first revelation via The Guardian yesterday that him and Harry had a bit of a scrap, a bit of a fallout, which allegedly involves Prince William grabbing him by the collar, pushing him to the floor, which made Prince Harry allegedly hit a dog bowl, crack it and injure his back. And that's what I thought would be the worst bit of this book in terms of the most sensational revelation. But I think what is really angering people online is the fact that he, what some people are saying is boasting that he killed 25 Taliban insurgents in Afghanistan during his second tour of Afghanistan. Now, I spoke to a former army major just a couple of hours ago, Major Chris Hunter, and he told me that he has betrayed the army by claiming that he killed 25 Taliban insurgents. It's not something that you talk about in public. It's very distasteful, in his words. And from looking online and from the various commentary around this, that seems to be the overall view.
Yeah, and I noticed that Philip Ingham was on Chris Hope's show just before my show, and he was saying, actually, he sees it slightly differently. He sees it as a cry for help in respect of all of these things, if you put it in the whole, what has been coming out from this book.
Yeah, Prince Harry, from the blurb of the book, he talks about his experience walking behind his mother's coffin when she died in 1997. We haven't seen that particular extract yet. But what he does talk about is he went back to Paris and he asked a driver to replicate the journey through the Paris tunnel that his mother, Diana, Princess of Wales, took in the lead up to her death. So I think, again, this shows, and he talks about the fact that following his altercation, which we talked about earlier with Prince William, the first person he called was his therapist rather than his wife, Meghan, about the altercation. I think perhaps speaks volumes to the fact that he was really perhaps struggling in various points throughout his life, his childhood, and then going into adulthood.
But again, people online and on shows like this are talking about the fact that if you spoke to your therapist in that instance, why didn't you speak to your therapist when Meghan was crawling out for help and she said there was no help available or surrounding her? Yeah,
there's a lot of inconsistencies here. If we remember back in the Oprah interview in 2021, Meghan said there was a lack of help for her mental health struggles. It's an allegation she repeated during the Netflix documentary series, which aired in December. But a lot of people are making the argument or questioning how Prince Harry can call his therapist on speed dial, so to speak, following an altercation with his brother, and yet Meghan didn't have any access or help for her mental health struggles. And, you know, I mean, we can only take it as fact as what we don't know exactly what Meghan felt, we don't know exactly what Prince Harry felt, but clearly there's a lot of unanswered questions here. And the problem is we're only getting one side of the story. We're only getting Prince Harry's version of the truth, because Buckingham Palace and Kensington Palace are not commenting. They haven't commented on any of the allegations or extracts which have been published. In my view, that perhaps is working. Their strategy of never complain, never explain, because you just have to see the latest YouGov poll on the royal family, which came out just before the Netflix documentary series aired. It showed that Harry and Meghan were very much the least popular royals, apart from Prince Andrew, in the eyes of the British public. All the other senior members of the royal family were very much on top.
Yeah. Just finally, Cameron, given this route of self-destruction, is there any way back into the royal family, all of this? Because he is sitting saying, oh, the ball's in their court, it's up to my father, it's up to my brother to deal with these issues. But they're not the ones that are blowing the family apart.
We've seen from the ITV trailer for the promotional interview he's done that's airing on Sunday that he wants his brother back, he wants his father back. But then from the extracts we have read, he is revealing a lot of very personal, private moments between him and his closest family members. I don't see a situation where Prince William in particular is going to reconcile in any way with his brother anytime soon. But it is the question that remains is whether Prince Harry and his wife Meghan is going to accept King Charles's invitation to come to the coronation. As far as we're aware, it's reported that King Charles has extended an invitation for Harry and Meghan to attend his coronation in May. As far as we know, there has been no change in that following the publication of this book.
Cameron, thank you so much for coming on to discuss this. No doubt you'll continue to be busy over the next couple of days. Well, a new year, but the strikes go on. Rail workers have walked out across the week, with the RMT striking on Tuesday, Wednesday, today and tomorrow, whilst ASLEF, of course, were on strike yesterday. This industrial action follows on from strikes across December amidst an ongoing dispute with rail companies over pay and working conditions. Our national reporter, Paul Hawkins, joins us now from London Euston Station. Paul, bring us up to date.
Yeah, so well, I can bring you up to date, but frankly, the situation hasn't really moved on in terms of the industrial action itself, Arlene. This is the second 48-hour walkout by the RMT this week. So since Tuesday and Wednesday, we had the first 48-hour strike. Wednesday, we had that strike by ASLEF. They represent the train drivers' union. Today, tomorrow, it's the RMT again, and that takes us pretty much to the end of the week. So really, Monday will be the first working day of 2023 when we'll have a full UK rail network. But the difference with this industrial action is set against the backdrop of these anti-strike laws that the government wants to introduce, but not for Northern Ireland, so affecting England, Wales and Scotland. And essentially, according to Grant Shapps, the business secretary, they want to introduce a minimum service level for fire, ambulance and rail staff. Voluntary agreements for the public sector, things such as health and education. But the unions aren't happy with it. They're considering legal action. Labour say they'd repeal any such laws. That's what we heard from Sir Keir Starmer yesterday. And this is what Mick Lynch, the boss of the RMT, told me earlier today.
Well, we feel outraged like everyone else. It's been a set piece this week. This government could have got some talks on this week, but instead they wanted to frame their announcement in the context of some railway strikes. So rather than talking to us from December the 15th, they've decided to wait till next Monday so that they could make this announcement. And of course, what this is an attack on human rights and civil liberties. It's most important in a free society that we have free trade unions. And now that they've lost the argument about the issues, about how public services are funded, how public sector workers are treated, they've also lost the argument on the existing anti-trade union laws, because every union is defeating them by having mass ballots. They want to make the action that comes out of those ballots.
I also asked Mick how he feels about the fact that the hospitality industry has lost £2.5 billion since the start of this dispute, and he said he was sorry, but he laid the blame for it at the door of number 10. Two things to note about this, Arlene, which is that how the unions respond will depend very much on the wording of that primary legislation when it's introduced. It's not going to affect the current round of industrial action, but the definition of minimum levels of service, that will be key, and the government say it will consult on that. Certainly, it makes those negotiations between the unions and the government and the rail companies at the start of next week a little bit more difficult with that threat of legislation in the background.
Paul, thank you very much. That's Paul Hawkins, our national reporter from London Euston Station there, bringing us up to date with all of the commentary given what's been going on. Well, in the last few hours, the Prime Minister has spoken to broadcasters where he was quizzed on what he would do to stop the constant strike action.
With regard to strikes, yesterday the government wrote to all union leaders, inviting them in for talks on Monday. Now, we incredibly value the important work that our public sector workers do, especially our nurses, and we want to have an honest, grown-up conversation about what's affordable, what's responsible for the country. Those invitations have gone out, and I'm hopeful that those meetings can happen on Monday so we can have a productive conversation and find a way through this. So I fully believe in the union's role in our society and the freedom for them to strike. But I also believe that that should be balanced with the right of ordinary working people to go about their lives free from significant disruption. And that's why we're going to bring forward new laws in common with countries like France, Italy, Spain and others that ensure that we have minimum levels of safety in critical areas like fire, like ambulance, so that even when strikes are going on, you know that your health will be protected. I think that's entirely reasonable, and that's what our new laws will do. We've always been clear that we want to have a grown-up, honest conversation, a two-way conversation with union leaders, and that's why the government has written, all departments have written to all their unions, inviting them in for talks on Monday so that we can have those conversations, talking about what's affordable, what's reasonable, what's responsible for our country. I think everyone agrees that the most pressing economic priority we have is reducing the cost of living, and getting a grip of inflation is the best way we can do that to ease the cost of living, not only for nurses, but for everyone.
That's the Prime Minister speaking earlier on to broadcasters. Well, up next, I'll be talking to the former Number 10 Business Director about what the year ahead has for the job market. I'll also be in a discussion with John Bolton, the former US National Security Advisor, about the state of play in Iran. But before all of that, let's take a look at the weather.
Alex Deacon here with your latest weather update. Today is a fine day for most parts of the UK. There are a few showers around, but generally dry and bright with lighter winds compared to yesterday. There is more windy and wet weather to come, courtesy of this area of low pressure. This one brought the heavy rain overnight. It's still affecting northern Scotland, but for most of us, we're between weather systems, hence why it's mostly fine. There are some showers across Wales, and we'll see a few more of those across North Wales and North West England this afternoon. The heavy showers and the gusty winds continue in the Northern Isles, but most other places, the winds are easing down. There's a fair bit of cloud around, but some places seeing some sunny spells. But then the showers return to the southwest later on. It's still pretty mild, not as warm as yesterday, but temperatures still mostly a couple of degrees above average. The wet weather in the southwest spreads across Wales, and then look at this. This is that weather system we saw earlier. It's going to bring a wet evening to Northern Ireland, and that rain will fairly rapidly spread before midnight across much of western England, Wales and Scotland, and continue to drift into the Midlands later in the night. Heavy rain for South Wales and southwest England. It could cause a few issues, particularly with the wet conditions over the hills. It will be a very mild night, so it's not a cold start to the weekend, but a soggy start for many. May start dry across parts of eastern England, but that won't last. Many western areas will brighten up through the morning with some sunny spells, but then the showers will get going, and we'll see some heavy blustery showers for most places during the afternoon. Temperatures, well, 10, 11 degrees, maybe dropping off a little bit actually through the afternoon, but still generally a touch above average. Obviously not feeling all that mild with the gusty winds and the showers, which will continue through the evening in most places. And not just that, they'll continue during Sunday as well. You can see the swirl here. That's the area of low pressure dominating our weather through Sunday. Some places mostly dry and bright across parts of the east, but otherwise, yes, some sunny spells, but expect plenty of showers on Sunday.
Here on GB News Live, we'll be keeping you in the picture, finding out what's happening across the country and finding out why it matters to you. We'll have the facts fast with our team of reporters and specialist correspondents. Wherever it's happening, we'll be there from 12 noon on TV, radio and online. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
We are GB News, and we'd like to say thank you to each and every one of you for bringing us your conversations, for helping our great nation find its voice. We are here for you on radio, television, and online, across England, Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland.
It's not the BBC, you actually get your facts right.
We are proud to be GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates. Do you not believe in prison?
I don't believe in prisons.
I'm completely stunned. I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and tune-in apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. for Gloria Meets. In exclusive interviews, I'll be finding out who our politicians really are and what they really think.
It's something that you would never want anyone to suffer.
I didn't know what channels there were. I didn't think I'd be believed.
I must have weighed about 7 stone and I'm 5'8".
My instincts was to sort of cover this up. I mean, clearly that was a mistake.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to the show. Well, we've now entered a new year and people are making forecasts about where the country will be heading during the course of the next 12 months. Will inflation subside? Will there be a recession? Or perhaps, what will the job market look like? Theresa May's former business director in Number 10, Jimmy McLaughlin, has conducted a survey of the jobs market. There's an array of findings, including 40% of people saying that they will likely move jobs this year and 10% believing that their jobs won't even exist. Well, I'm delighted to say that I'm now joined by Jimmy McLaughlin to discuss his findings. Jimmy, thank you so much for joining me on the show. I was really taken by the finding that 1 in 5 people cited the ability to work flexibly and from home as a primary preference for moving job. This is part of the outcome from COVID, isn't it? And the fact that people want now to have that flexibility.
Exactly that, Arlene. So there's been a huge change in the job market and the way that we work since the coronavirus pandemic. And as you say, that startling statistic of 1 in 5 citing it as their top 2 reasons for moving jobs potentially in 2023 to get more flexibility. Of course, the highest one was more money and a higher salary. That's what people go to work for. But it is interesting to see how these other wider benefits that employees can now obtain from employers are making such a big difference in where people are deciding where to work.
And I thought the point about jobs not even existing in the future is a good one, because for a long time we've been hearing about the 4th industrial revolution and artificial intelligence becoming very important in our economy. This sort of moves us in that direction, doesn't it?
Yeah, there's absolutely, that's a kind of key point. 1 in 10 not thinking their job will exist by the end of the year. That's partly due to the recession that we'll see this year, but also it is that increasing automation that's taking place. But I'm an optimist when it comes to this. I think automation creates lots of new jobs as well. If you think about it, we've never had more technology. We've never had more automation in work at the moment, but actually our employment stats are as high as they've ever been as well. So it's not all doom and gloom about this. Lots of the jobs that are being created are exciting. We recently had somebody on the Jimmy's Jobs of the Future podcast who are piloting drones. Those amazing celebrations we saw above the London Eye and above Buckingham Palace for the Queen's Jubilee. That's a whole new swathe of jobs. They employ 50 people in Leeds, a company called New Substance. And that's a great example of a job of the future, but also the innovation that's taking place right across the British economy. So there's plenty of reasons to be optimistic as well.
Yes, but and you will know that we were talking about strikes at the beginning of the shows, and the fact that a lot of these strikes are as much about no redundancies as they are about better pay and conditions. And that issue of public sector workers and indeed manufacturing workers who get very, very worried about artificial intelligence because, as you rightly say, a lot of them think that their jobs are at risk.
Yeah, and there's no doubt about that. But job markets have always been changing. There's always been more automation that's been taking place, right from kind of the Luddite arguments sort of centuries ago. And so actually, it creates, what it can do is kind of create a better job for lots of people. Obviously we had all this with the coal mines in the 1980s as well. Well, actually, when you think about the job of a coal miner, it wasn't a particularly good one, being sent a mile underground to kind of dig coal. It's a very dangerous job. That now doesn't really exist, and that's a good thing. But of course, when you're going through these changes, it's really difficult to kind of see that necessarily. And I think that's where Rishi Sunak was right in his speech this week, to kind of focus on data, and that being such a kind of key under pillar of the jobs of the future, because every job is going to require the ability to interpret data and to be able to explain that to customers or potential partners. It's such an important part of the economy that's going to be taking place, and we need to get better at it.
Yeah, and certainly when I was Economy Minister in Northern Ireland, we used to talk all of the time about more and better jobs. And do you think that innovation, entrepreneurship in the artificial intelligence sector will bring us those more and better jobs? Because surely that's something that we should be looking for. Aspiration, growth, some of the things that haven't been talked about recently and which I think needs to be talked about.
Yeah, exactly. I think Northern Ireland's a great example of what's happening in cybersecurity there. It's becoming a whole hub for that. And that's, something that didn't even exist 30 years ago. And now Belfast and Northern Ireland are becoming a real leader in that. And also you've got companies like Stat Sports in Northern Ireland as well that, are all about wearable tech for athletes. And they're employing lots of people and creating jobs there. And it's the challenge that politicians and we have in the media is that these stories don't necessarily create headlines because it's an entrepreneur employing 4 or 5 people a week, perhaps. And that's not headline news. Whereas when Debenhams closes, or like you have the strikes in the public sector at the moment, they're big news stories and they're big figures involved. But actually, you have got all these pockets of innovation taking place right across the country. There's an amazing company that I was talking to last week, based just outside of Middlesbrough. It's called Double 11. They employ 400 people in the video games industry now. And they're a B2B company. So they sell to other businesses. So you might not have heard of them, but there are these amazing stories right across the UK happening of job creation. And that's what we try and do on Jimmy's Jobs of the Future, is shine a light on these amazing companies and the stories and the jobs of the future.
And Jimmy, just to finish, are you going to track changes over the next 12 months in terms of your survey? Is that what you intend to do?
Yeah, absolutely. We'll be doing it on a sort of quarterly basis in terms of how satisfied people are with their jobs and what they're looking for. Because I do think it's this huge kind of flex moment in the employment economy. I mean, you've got the recession, but also a lot of people stuck with their jobs throughout the coronavirus because they knew them. Whereas now people are going back into offices much more. There's that opportunity to potentially change and so on. I think that's why we're seeing the statistics about 40% of people likely to move this year. That's almost 10 million people across the UK economy. That's a very fluid job market that we're going to see. So we'll certainly be tracking it.
Well, look forward to having you back on again when we get those findings in a quarter's time. Thanks so much
Arlene,
for joining us, Jimmy. Thank you. Well, lots of you getting in touch with your views on Prince Harry, many of them unbroadcastable before the watershed. But here's a taste of the more family-friendly emails. Melanie says, Harry has put a crosshairs on the backs of our royal family with his selfish splutterings about the Taliban. What a right royal, dangerous idiot. Don't come back, Harry. You're not welcome. Alan says, is there anything this man won't do for money? Nothing left to sell now. His soul is gone. And William says, isn't the motive for Prince Harry's provocative revelations to sell his book and make lots of money? So shallow and so sad. He has cursed himself. Finally, Drew says, it's astounding, isn't it, that an adult man who says he killed 25 enemy soldiers is claiming to have been hurt by being pushed over by his brother. Did he not read this before publishing? Well, I'm sure we'll have many more comments in relation to Harry over the coming days. But up next, I'll be talking to former US National Security Advisor John Bolton about the state of play with Iran. I'll also be comparing and contrasting the speeches made by Rishi Sunak and Sir Keir Starmer earlier in the week with GB News political reporter Olivia Utley. But first of all, here's Rhiannon with your news headlines.
Arlene, thank you. It's 2:31, your top stories from the GB newsroom. Prince Harry has revealed he found out his grandmother, Queen Elizabeth, had died via a news website and not from his family. It's among a number of revelations from his memoir Spare, including allegations his brother Prince William allegedly attacked him. The Duke of Sussex also claims he killed 25 Taliban fighters in Afghanistan. The admission's been condemned by a senior Taliban leader who's taken to Twitter saying they weren't chess pieces, they were humans. Former royal correspondent Charles Ray told us the book could be the end of Harry's relationship with the royal family.
These are machine gun revelations and accusations, and it is staggering that he's come out with all this stuff. I mean, to a point of being disgusting with some of the revelations. I don't believe that Harry's ever going to be forgiven for doing what he's done with this book. I mean, the documentaries and the Oprah Winfrey were bad enough, but this book is way out there, really is.
The Prime Minister's invited union leaders representing striking workers to meet with him on Monday. Rishi Sunak says he hopes for a grown-up conversation about what's affordable. It comes as passengers experience the fourth consecutive day of train strikes over jobs, pay and conditions. Flu cases in England's hospitals are continuing to rise as ambulance handover delays hit a record high. Just over 40% of patients waited more than half an hour to be transferred from the ambulances to A&E. An average of just over 5,000 flu patients were in hospital last week. That's up 47% on the previous week. It comes amid a wave of strikes across the health sector. The Royal College of Nursing, though, says their members will now consider a 10% pay rise instead of the 19% originally demanded. And former Chelsea striker and manager Gianluca Vialli has died from cancer at the age of 58. Vialli earned 59 caps for Italy and won the Champions League with Juventus before joining Chelsea in 1996. He was the first Italian to take charge of a Premier League side, becoming the Blues manager in 1998. TV, online and DAB Plus radio, this is GB News. It's back to the briefing with Arlene Foster in just a moment.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Deebs & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Mark Stein. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
Why not take us home with you by visiting the GB News shop at gbnews.store. You'll find all the official merchandise, a really good present actually for yourself, your friends or your family.
We ship across the UK mainland at no extra cost. GB News, the People's Channel.
Here on GB News Live, we'll be keeping you in the picture, finding out what's happening across the country and finding out why it matters to you. We'll have the facts fast with our team of reporters and specialist correspondents. Wherever it's happening, we'll be there from 12 noon on TV, radio and online. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday on GB News, it's Bev Turner Today from 10 a.m. We're going to be here for you, our GB News family, to keep you up to date, but also make you smile.
The guy went from puberty to adultery.
And I can't wait to bring a few of my own opinions.
I have no time for cultural totalitarianism.
We'll engage in passionate, but always polite debate, with your thoughts and opinions at the centre of it all. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
Welcome back to the briefing. Well, earlier this week it was revealed that the United Kingdom looks set to designate the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps, also known as the IRGC, as a terrorist organisation. This will follow the decision made by the US in 2019. The revelation comes in the same week, which marks the 3rd anniversary of the US assassination of Iran's Qasem Soleimani, who was a key leader with the IRGC. Tensions in Iran remain high amidst ongoing protests, which were sparked following the death of Mahsa Amini. Unrest in Iran is also running alongside attempts by the Biden administration to resurrect a nuclear deal with Iran. Well, joining me to discuss all of that and the state of play in Iran is the former US National Security Advisor, John Bolton. John, really delighted that you could find the time to join us this afternoon. There's a lot going on in Iran at this present moment in time, but I presume that you're pleased that the UK is finally going to deal with this IRGC terrorist organisation.
Right. No, I think it's a move I hope comes soon. The United States designated the IRGC as terrorist in 2019. It was not without some discussion within the U.S. government. It's an important move against an element of the government of Iran itself. But I hope if the UK takes this step, the even more recalcitrant EU will come next.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, you've been watching, presumably, this Russian-Iran axis growing over a period of years. And recently we've seen more than 80 Iranian drones were launched by Russian military and shot down over Ukraine in a 48-hour period, actually. So there's loads of weaponry coming from Iran into Russia. And likewise, Russia will have a relationship now with Iran, which is quite concerning. I mean, this partnership between them has been growing, but this war in Ukraine seems to have cemented that. Is that right?
Yes, I think that's accurate. I mean, Russia has provided political cover for Iran's nuclear weapons program in the Security Council at the UN for 20 years. And I think the relationship with China is also growing. I mean, I think generally Russia and China are getting closer and closer. I think Iran is a part of that. I'd add North Korea into that mix, too. And I think what Iran is doing in the Ukraine war by selling these drones to Russia is very concerning. We've just been learning here in public that the Iranian drones have chips and other components manufactured by U.S. companies, which we had thought theoretically were prohibited for sale to Iran. So there are obviously some leaks here. I'm not saying anything illegal was done, but it means there are holes in our sanctions, and I don't doubt that means there are holes in UK and EU sanctions as well on Iran we need to plug.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, the problem with supply chains is, particularly for military weapon, they're so complicated sometimes that it's difficult to keep an eye on what's going where. But I mean, it's not just military cooperation that's happening now, John. It's economically they're cooperating as well between Iran and Russia. And that surely should be of concern. This sort of partnership is continuing to grow.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, I think the Iranians are clearly helping the Russians evade European and American sanctions. There's no doubt about it. What I would hope, just focusing on Iran for a minute, though, is that in London and European capitals, people now take a much harder look at the Iran nuclear deal, which was a bad deal to begin with in 2015, which the Iranians have been violating. And now even the Biden administration has slowed down trying to get back in, given the resistance, the real near revolutionary conditions on the streets of Iran's cities, protesting the Ayatollahs directly, questioning their legitimacy over the past 3+ months. I think the regime itself is now in real trouble. This is the last time any of us should be doing anything that props them up.
Yeah, indeed. And I was going to come to that Iran nuclear agreement, which you pushed very hard to deal with. And President Biden, up until recently, has been trying to bring it back into being again. Are you concerned that the International Atomic Agency director is set to visit Iran later this month? Is that something that concerns you?
No, I think the Director General Grassi has done actually a pretty good job during his tenure in trying to confront Iran and hold it to account. I hope he doesn't weaken his position. The Iranian government has been stonewalling the International Atomic Energy Agency for 3 decades now. I don't expect that to change. But I do think that if he comes back and reports further lack of cooperation, again, I hope European governments, the ones that really negotiated the deal with Iran, Germany, France, and Britain, will come to recognize it's a bad deal. It needs to be scrapped, and European sanctions against Iran for its nuclear activities should come back into force.
And John, just finally, you made reference to the protests that are ongoing in Iran after the death of Mahsa Amini and the hope that the regime may be in trouble. Is there more that Western governments like the United Kingdom, like the administration in America, should be doing to help those who are protesting against the regime?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think we should consult with the opposition. We don't want to do anything that puts them in a difficult position, but I think they can use resources to help them in communication inside Iran, among the different groups in different cities, different regions, and with the outside, so that the Iranian government can't prevent the cooperation that's necessary. You know, one aspect of these demonstrations is they're all over Iran. It's not just in Tehran or just in a few big cities. And it's spontaneous. This is deep and it's strong. But one disadvantage is there's no central command and control. I mean, it shows how spontaneous it was. But if the opposition can communicate better among its various parts, then I think that puts even more pressure on the government in Tehran.
John, I'm really pleased you were able to join us this afternoon. Thank you for your expertise and hope to talk to you again soon. Thank you.
Thanks for having me.
Well, it's the final day of the inquest into the death of 19-year-old Chris Nota, who died after falling from a height in Southend. This week, the hearing heard that medical professionals failed to assess the long-term risks of discharging him and that they were not equipped to manage and deal with his needs. Meanwhile, in Essex, over 93 families who've lost loved ones are campaigning for witnesses to give evidence under oath into the county's mental health services. Our national reporter, Theo Chikokambo, has this report.
We had a triple family bereavement in a short space of time, and bereavement is really so much more serious for an autistic young person to process.
Julia's son Chris had been under the care of Essex Mental Health Services when he died in July 2020 after falling from a bridge in Southend. It's a mother's worst nightmare. Now she wants answers and those responsible held accountable.
On the morning he died, he was supposed to be having therapy. I would pick him up every day. I reasoned that he would be safer there at night because there were night staff. But I'd pick him up every day and he was due to have therapy. I was waiting to drive over and sit outside in the car. I would be 15 minutes early. Take no chances. But the therapy didn't happen and the door was thrown open and he walked out to his death.
Heart House here in Essex is one of a number of mental health rehabilitation services in the county. Now, campaigners are asking for a statutory public inquiry whereby witnesses will have to give evidence under oath into the county's mental health services. And they say this is the only way their families will be able to achieve justice for their loved ones.
Leading the petition is Melanie. Her son Matthew was found hanging in his room in 2012. Just a week after being admitted under the Mental Health Act. The inquest recorded an open narrative verdict.
I mean, Matthew was only on the ward 7 days. He had no care plan. He had no key worker. So many failings in his care. Had all the policies that have been written over the years and the processes and the observations and everything that's meant to have been done correctly, my son would still be alive. I hear from families across our nation every single day that are in a situation that I was in 10 years ago, and that has to change. They're desperate for help for their loved ones.
Also within the county, there's an ongoing inquiry looking into the deaths of approximately 1,500 people who died while they were a patient on a mental health ward or within 3 months of discharge between 2000 and 2020. Families concerned say it's limited in scope with no offering of accountability and doesn't go far enough. Meanwhile, Julia wants the system to change so there's more transparency for families when their children are under care.
So there is a barrier between us and doctors. We are not invited to meetings where these issues are being discussed and decisions made. At Actually, we are not invited because we will ask for access to life-saving basic health care for our loved ones. And this is not on offer, really.
The fight for justice continues for 93 plus families involved as they push to secure the first ever statutory public inquiry into mental health services. Theo Chicomba, GB News.
A very concerning package there from Theo. Well, the Essex Partnership University Trust say that they will be releasing a statement on this case later today when the inquest concludes. Now, we're through the worst of the winter and the political parties are out of the blocks setting out their stalls for the year ahead. On Wednesday, the Prime Minister has made 5 pledges he plans to achieve by 2024, including halving inflation, falling NHS waiting lists and stopping channel crossings. Meanwhile, yesterday, Sir Keir Starmer called for real change and national renewal in a speech of his own. Well, joining me now to compare the two speeches is GB News political reporter Olivia Utley. Olivia, they were going to be compared because they were made virtually in the same place.
Yes, and I think the very first thing to say about them is the similarities, really.
Yeah.
We know that Keir Starmer has a bit of a problem with the fact that Rishi Sunak and him have quite similar mannerisms, quite a similar way of presenting themselves. We know that Keir Starmer quite liked being in opposition against Boris Johnson and Liz Truss because he could get some clear blue water between himself and them and be the sort of safe pair of hands, the competent person, whereas Rishi Sunak comes across as pretty competent. So both of them have that same sort of persona going on. In terms of substance, I mean, again, there wasn't that much between them. Rishi Sunak laid out these 5 pledges, which on the face of it seemed pretty bold and pretty inspiring. But when you scratch a little bit beneath the surface, you can see that actually they're either pretty vague or not very ambitious at all. Growing the economy has grown in every 3-year period since the Tudor times, so it won't be very impressive if he manages that one. Bringing down NHS waiting lists, well, they're incredibly high at the moment, and without a lockdown, we would assume that would happen. Stopping the boats, that is one where there was a big difference between the two, because Rishi Sunak did make this actually very bold promise that he will stop the boats, partly by bringing in this legislation. Not quite clear how it's going to actually work. Keir Starmer didn't properly address that. He talked about tackling the problem upstream, which he's said many times and doesn't really mean a huge amount other than try and negotiate with the French, which has, of course, been done before. So there was a bit of wiggle room there. On energy, that was another issue where Starmer definitely had the upper hand. He talked about sticking plaster politics, which I think will resonate with quite a lot of people in the country. Talked about the Tories neglecting nuclear, neglecting onshore wind, etc. Rishi Sunak didn't mention that at all. Neither of them mentioned the Northern Ireland Protocol, which is...
Yes, I noticed that.
Yes, pretty bizarre that Rishi Sunak's 5 priorities for getting Britain back on the right path doesn't include resolving this huge problem. But yeah, those are their stalls for the year. Nothing that really... Nothing to shake us out of our stupor, really.
No.
And quite a lot of similarities.
Yeah. And the point I was making was they made the speeches in virtually the same place in the East End in Stratford. So they are sort of both moving into that centre ground, aren't they? But then you ask yourself, what are the policies behind that? Because, you know, there's some concern about the Labour Party and what they have to say about what is a woman, their position on the Gender Recognition Act, which is passed in Scotland. They're not talking about things like that, but we know that they're in favour of those things.
Yes, it was interesting to hear, actually, Rishi Sunak talk for the first time, literally, I think the first time I've ever heard him talk about social issues. He talked about the family, he talked about bringing down crime, but again, there wasn't a huge amount behind that. He was definitely trying to set out some distance with Keir Starmer, who on these social issues is criticised for being woke and for saying that he would do something like the gender reforms that Nicola Sturgeon's brought in Scotland. So Rishi Sunak is clearly trying to differentiate himself from that by setting out more of a sort of socially conservative vision. But there don't seem to be very many policies to back it up. I was in the Prime Minister's press conference and I asked him about childcare. He says he's supporting the family, but he's decided to throw out the reforms that Liz Truss was planning to bring in, which would make childcare more affordable for ordinary families. He doesn't seem to be doing anything to help, you know, married couples who want to transfer allowance from one to the other. Policies, socially conservative policies like that, which would differentiate him from Starmer, he doesn't seem to have grasped.
Also, if he's going to grow the economy, he needs people to be able to go to work. And so people who have huge childcare costs, and those of us who have children know what the childcare costs are and know the impact and the drag that can be on the wages of family members. Why doesn't he want to take those childcare reforms and run with them? I simply don't understand that. Surely that would be the right thing to do.
It's very strange that he isn't running this, because, as you say, he's got one of his bugbears at the moment, and rightly so, is the fact that 1 in 5 people who are unemployed want to get back into work and are unable to do so. One of the reasons for that is the enormous NHS waiting list, people who can't go to work because they're waiting for treatment, which is debilitating.
Fair enough.
One of the other big reasons for that, as you say, is the childcare problem. It seems that government after government for decades now has decided that the best way to persuade people to go back to work is to make work sort of the only option, to make it that you basically have to spend your entire salary on childcare rather than looking after your children yourself. There are lots of social conservatives on Rishi Sunak's backbenches who don't like the fact that Rishi Sunak seems to be pursuing that policy as well. And it would seem like an easy way to differentiate himself from Starmer would be to go ahead with those childcare reforms. But he has chosen not to make that a priority for now. Perhaps it's because he doesn't have much political power. He still does have the majority inherited from Boris Johnson, but we know that there are quite a lot of disillusioned, disaffected backbenchers who may not support him.
Well, I think they would support him on that, but that's only my view. Olivia, thank you so much for joining us and for having that discussion. Well, the Prime Minister announced his 5-point plan, as we've been speaking about with Olivia, and we also had a speech from the leader of the opposition, Sir Keir Starmer. But neither of them mentioned the ongoing issue of the Northern Ireland Protocol, which has led to no working devolution in Northern Ireland. To discuss this and other issues, I'm now joined by Emma Little-Pengelly, a DUP member of the Legislative Assembly. Emma, so good to see you. Thank you for joining me. Well, I've made the point there's no mention of the Northern Ireland Protocol for both of these men. Did that surprise you?
Well, I think at this stage, sadly, it doesn't surprise me. But of course, we know that this has to be addressed. It is the barrier to getting devolution up and running again in Northern Ireland. Both the Prime Minister and the Leader of the Opposition know that. So this does need to be addressed. It's not a simple issue to tackle, but it has to be tackled in order to restore devolution and the Assembly here in Northern Ireland. So we would like to see this much higher up the agenda than it appears to be in relation to these two speeches.
And another man who was commenting this week was Leo Varadkar, who is now, again, the Irish Prime Minister. And he made the comment that mistakes were made on all sides when it came to negotiating the Northern Ireland Protocol. What did you make of his comments, Emma?
Well, you know, both you and I have had some considerable experience with Mr. Varadkar. And of course we shared those concerns over many years. He went in and he batted incredibly hard for the interests of the Republic of Ireland. Of course, that was partly his role, but we would have liked to have seen a much fairer approach, looking after the concerns and interests also of those East-West relationships, which are so important, not just to Northern Ireland, but of course to the Republic of Ireland as well. So, of course, I think it's welcome that we're seeing some of this reflection, but the key thing here is, will this reflection be genuine? Will it actually change anything? Because what we need here is a completely different approach than we've seen previously from the Irish government to these negotiations.
And bringing all of that together, then we've had commentary from Leo Varadkar. It doesn't seem to be a priority for either the Prime Minister or the Leader of the Opposition, or the opposition as opposed to operation. How does this all set us up then for negotiations, given that we're heading towards the 25th anniversary of the Belfast Agreement?
Well, I think that there's a big misunderstanding here that somehow the problems here in Northern Ireland are between the parties. The issue is not between the parties, and political negotiations between the parties will not resolve those. The only thing that can resolve this is to see these significant issues of the protocol resolved. The UK government, the Prime Minister, knows what needs to be done. The Irish government have been involved in discussions, so they're aware of the unionist concerns. There's not a single elected unionist in Northern Ireland, as you know, Arlene, that supports this protocol. There are serious issues with medicines, with the impact on trade, the diversion of that trade. We're already seeing that very clearly from what is coming through over the last 18 months. And that's before huge swathes of this protocol are even in place. And I think the stark thing is that this protocol is costing £436,000 a day in terms of paperwork and supporting traders. That is the taxpayer, the UK taxpayer, taxpayer that's paying for that. That could be spent on health and education, or in your last piece on childcare initiatives, so needed by ordinary working families across this United Kingdom. And yet this is being spent on unnecessary checks and paperwork because of this protocol. We're all suffering from this and it needs to be addressed.
Thank you so much for joining me, Emma. I'm sorry we're going to have to leave it there because we've run out of time, because you've been watching The Briefing with me, Arlene Foster. The show's back every Friday from 2 p.m. Up next is Patrick Christie's.
Hello, Alex Deakin here with your latest weather update. Most of us have had a dry Friday, but most of us are going to see some pretty wet weather through the course of the weekend. Lots of heavy showers around and a gusty wind, and also turning cooler. We're at the moment kind of between weather systems, which is why most of us have been dry today. But right now we're being pushed from the west by a couple of sets of weather fronts. This one introducing showers already